If I were to do so, Chair, I'd probably be out that door post-haste.
Leave arms folded.
Ready for action.
Tēnei te mihi kia tātou katoa. Greetings to us all. Tai hoki rā, kia koutou rā e matakanohi mai, including those who are on Zoom. Thank you for your gesture towards our health here, Will. We wish you speedy recovery. Hoi anō ka huri mai au ki a koe rā e Martin, tēnei tā koe e mihi ki a koe. Kia kawe ngai ngā kōrero kai te matinga e tō whaia. Tēnei te mihi ki a koe me ki rā i tō whaia. Nō reira e koe. Haere ki te putahi nui o rehua, te pōtūtanga ro pīpiri, te taka te urunga, te moenga, te whakaarahia. Kei reira rā o ki ai. Hono ho mai rā ki a rātau e wairuake. Anō reira tēnei te mihi ki a koe rā haere. Hoki mai rā ki a koe rā e Martin. Me ki rā i tēnā te kapua pauri e uhia nei kei rungi a koe. Tēnei mātau e kotahi nei. E mahana mai i au nei tahataha. E miri mai rā i au nei tuara. Me ki rā he manaakitanga mū kei roto ki tēnei te matinga i tō whaia. Nō reira tēnei te mihi ki a koe rā e te kai kaunihira mai i a mātou nei kia kapohia ngā kōrero ki rungi a koe. Nō reira tēnei te mihi ki a tātou. Just acknowledging the passing of Martin's mum. It's not a hard, well, it's a very hard thing to contend with, and words rather fail. But here's us saying, we are here to support you and to your family at this time. Ki mai rā kia tātou me ki rato tātou nei karakia. Our karakia is our usual karakia. Because it's te wiki o te reo Māori, there needs to be some gusto and some volume. May I say, Chair?
Looking forward to it.
Looking forward to it. So all I'll do is I'll set the pace, the mitter, and if people could join in with the volume, we'll be fine. We don't need the words, everybody knows them. Oh, okay. Just in case.
What's that?
Becoming the last one.
The last one.
Don't know the words.
Right, here we go.
We're on your fridge.
Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi ake ana te atakura, he teo, he hoka, he hauhu, ti hei mauri ora. Cease the winds from the west, cease the winds from the south, let the breeze blow over the land, let the breeze blow over the ocean, let the red-tipped dawn come with a sharpened ear, a touch of frost, a promise of a glorious day. That was wonderful. I remind you all that the Kiwaha flags are flying across our whole region, wherever you might venture, and as you go past them, if you're a passenger, please read them to the driver. If you're a driver, keep your eyes on the road. And Tony, tēnei mātou e mihi ki a koe. Mai anō kei roto kei wanginu e tātou, me ki rei tēnei kaupapa whakahirahira e kawea nei e koe, acknowledging your presence and the importance of this kaupapa e pāna ki te wai. Urere tēnei te mehau. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Patty. Yeah, welcome, Tony. Welcome to our staff who are present as well. Apologies. We have one from Will. Oh no, Will's there.
He's there.
Yes.
There he is. Do we have any other apologies? Anyone heard from Charlie? No. Okay, someone have no apologies, so we're not moving. Any notices? If there are no notices, we'll move to conflict of interest declarations.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, just one notice.
Yes, Mike.
If I can be excused from the second half of this extraordinary special council meeting, we currently have the police commissioner at Whenua, which I'm kind of involved in as well. So I'm multitasking today.
Thanks, Mike. Will we be seeing you again after you've met the minister?
Possibly.
Okay, thanks, Mike. And I want to acknowledge all the people who are on Zoom too. Thanks for being there, because it's a long way for you to travel, especially Will and Michelle. So thanks for attending. And Michelle, all your kakatea trees are planted. Thank you.
That's good news.
No conflict of interest declarations. That's good. Confirmation of the minutes from the last Regional Council meeting of the 26th. Are there any issues with those minutes? If not, can we have a mover, please? Jareth, thank you. Annie White, thank you very much. All those in favour of moving those minutes? Aye.
Aye.
Minutes are confirmed, thank you. So we move straight to decision items, and we are confirming the business case for Three Waters. Now, Tony, are you taking this? Are you?
I'll make some opening remarks and
We only
Tony's.
need a few because everyone would have read it, James. We've been through it time and time again, so we'll get a few opening remarks and then we'll get some questions for either you or Tony.
Thanks, Rex. So look, I think probably the salient points at this juncture of the process is that this is 2 years worth of work that was commissioned by the 5 councils prior to central government launching their Three Waters reform process. They were starting to muse about it about the same time as we were. Water was a priority in the last Triennium Agreement. It is in the current Triennium Agreement for councils in the region to collaborate on. It has been a significant program of engagement, particularly between Hastings, Napier and ourselves following the Havelock North water crisis. And this body of work naturally built on that, looking ahead as well towards the large volume of capital investment required to meet emerging environmental and public health standards. So Morrison Lowe were commissioned to do this independently and provide us with a free and frank view of the issues and options around the future of Three Waters provision, which they've done. You've had a number of workshops in which the detail has been presented by Dan Bonifant in particular, and had some opportunities to interrogate all of that. And at this stage, simply what Council's being asked to do is to note and receive the report and continue to support our ongoing participation in collaboration around the future delivery of Three Waters in the region. And on that note, and the final thing I would say is that while the report focuses on the 4 territorial authorities and their assets, we elected over 2 years ago to participate in this process because of our very strong interest in seeing Three Waters delivered in the region, to the region in an effective and efficient manner, given our regulatory responsibilities for the performance of those assets. But in addition to that, we also have assets which may, in the fullness of time, benefit from being part of a larger management structure if indeed the region gets to that point. So we felt it was important to have a seat at the table, to have some influence over the body of work, and to support it in ensuring that the best possible future options for the management of these assets for our region can be achieved. So that's very high level the reason we're here, how we've got to this point in the journey, and I know that Tony is available to answer any questions that Council may have in relation to the report, although I should just stress that Tony's not the author. While she has facilitated the work program for us on behalf of the 5 councils, the report itself, the business case, is an independently procured and developed one by Morrison Lowe, and you have had opportunity to talk to Dan previously about his findings. So that's where we're at. Is there anything you wanted to add, Tony?
Yes, I'd just like to acknowledge the role of Perry as part of our regional collaboration team. Perry has led the Māori engagement workstream, which has culminated in the inclusion of a cultural case into this report. This is a absolute differentiator in terms of the way that generally councils approach the better business case methodology for Treasury, and this is a real opportunity going forward, and that kaupapa will continue through our reform engagement. engagement with government. So I'd also like to acknowledge our Chair Rex and the other mayors for sponsoring this piece of work up front with a memorandum of understanding, and the chief executives. This has truly been a collaborative exercise, probably not really quite understood at how many levels and aspects into the organisation this piece of work has been. And to your team here in the Regional Council, Chris Dolly, who isn't here today, for his support as well. So, thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Right. Any questions from councillors on this paper? I actually thought we were going to do more than just note and receive, but it appears that's the case.
Well, could I just comment on that? I'm conscious of time, and I thought we're going to have a special meeting like this. There would have been a substantive decision. When I see to note and receive, I think, well, this is the second of 3 days that I'll travel to the Regional Council for a meeting, and I just don't think it warrants the weight of it, actually. No disrespect to all the work that you've all done, etc. I get all of that, but I'd have thought a special meeting was a substantive decision to be made. I know that I'm not diminishing the importance of this, but you get my point.
Chair, could I just make a comment? Perhaps the first thing is specifically to say in relation to the recommendations, we are asking you to support the continued collaboration around this Three Waters reform, and while that might read like motherhood and apple pie, there is, I think, genuinely a question across some of the other councils at the moment about appetite for continuing down the reform path. And so, in asking you to signal your support for that today, that is meaningful. It is about working toward further reform. But more substantially, to Councillor Barker's point, when we initially planned these extraordinary meetings, there had been an expectation of a higher degree of adoption of the findings and moving forward into long-term plan amendment processes to consult the community on the reforms. Now, what's happened has been that central government have obviously started to accelerate their reform program, and they have asked us at this stage to pause our community engagement while they get through the electoral period. New minister gets appointed, or same minister gets reappointed, and then there's further re-engagement with central government around the timing of their reform processes and what might be required to support Hawke's Bay's reform. So there has been a last-minute course correction, which has taken this from much more of a stronger decision meeting into one of more an adoption, but continuing the conversation with central government.
Agree with both of those. I also like to agree, we have agreed the report, that Tony's point about the Māori engagement is steps well ahead of what we've had before. I think it's outstanding. But can I come to I'd like to have your view on this. It seems to be from the comments made in the paper that the Napier City is looking to step away from this and distance itself from it.
Here,
And, sorry?
here.
And they're now making this seem like it's going to be Napier City Council, Napier City ratepayers are going to be subsidising the Three Waters infrastructure of other elements of the region. This is the rhetoric that's emerging. So I just want to see what you think is of the chances of this surviving such a position.
Happy to respond to that. Certainly with the modelling that is in the report, at the moment the Hastings ratepayers will be paying slightly more than they do today in terms of the enhanced status quo with the new regulations. As part of the government reform process, they have asked all the councils to sign up to a memorandum of understanding to participate in the reform program. Napier has signed up to that. As part of that, they're entering into the principles of collaboration, not only with government, but also regionally. So, this piece around us in this report asking for us to continue that collaboration is key, and it's also part of an undertaking that Napier has signed up to. One of the challenges that we have articulated as part of the report, the presentations, the workshops, is this issue around perceived inequities around debt valuations, etc., plus also cross-subsidisation. As part of the engagement with DIA and the Three Waters Reform Programme at the moment, that is the number one issue we've got on the table. We all understand collectively as a region that this is an issue for Napier, so how is government going to support us to get this off the table? So we'll be expecting investment from government as part of this. Those conversations have started. They're aware of these challenges. We're continuing our meetings with them. Separate to the wider reform program, I think, you know, DIA have seen us as, I guess, the starter regionally around the Three Waters reform. So, you know, our piece of work is significant to them to understand the challenges they've got ahead. We presented to the Three Waters steering group last week, Dan and I, and we've got another follow-up conversation next week to talk about these challenges with DI in a more informal way.
I just want to put my position really clear. I don't disagree with the thrust of this paper. I disagree with the nature of the contribution from Napier that we are going to pay more and therefore we are anti this. West Country has been built on going all the way back to Coates and the National Roads Board. Northland could not afford, out of its own resources, the roading infrastructure needed. So they built the National Road Board, so it collected from all and built roads for everyone. That's who we are as a country. I agree with that. And I think this idea that there's this issue of cross-subsidisation is antithetical to exactly that. So I should only pay taxes for the health system when I'm ill. Well, I don't agree with that.
Mr. Chair.
I think we should all do that. I think it should be...
Debate?
I'm very happy for this.
No, we're not in debate, Councillor.
Well, I was just...
Because we have a different view here. So I'll come
Oh.
to that.
Chair, can I just provide one more answer to the question from Councillor Barker? The report...
Which question was that?
It was in relation to the our understanding of the potential inequities of the burden for funding the future provision of Three Waters in the region. The asset condition information is not perfect, and we do have parts of the region where there is some lack of certainty around asset condition, and I think for Napier in particular, there are some questions over their future capital requirements, and so while on the basis of the modelling here, the Napier ratepayer would pay slightly more,
Not slightly.
certainly slightly by way of comparison to the reductions achieved for Wairoa and Central Hawke's Bay ratepayers, but Napier has very significant issues with the outfall, as we know. They've got upcoming capital in relation to their drinking water. Their wastewater and stormwater network is going to be seriously challenged by sea level rise. They have in the order of 80% of their stormwater currently entering the estuary, which is a range of issues that we all know about. And the cost of cleaning up their stormwater is not factored into this. This is just so far in drinking water and wastewater. So if I think about the 30 to 50 year time horizon of rising environmental standards, what we're trying to achieve between us with respect to the estuary, with climate change and sea level rise, there's every possibility that Napier's capital expenditure will be greatly more than is currently modelled in here, and could end up actually being the burden on the rest of the region. Now, that's not presented in the current modelling, but I think that is a possibility over the longer term.
All right.
Thanks, James. Any other questions? Any other questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chair,
And then you
one of the questions that if you like, on the numbers that I've got two questions. One is in relation to the proposed structure and one is in relation to the numbers. I'm interested to know the movement of assets from the respective councils into the proposed entity, and the consequence. I understand it's in the vicinity of $2 billion worth of asset movement from councils into it, and I'm interested in the residual remaining assets of those councils and the effects on their balance sheets, which is not explored in any great detail in the report. Is there a further report pending and/or other information which identifies for all players what those consequences are financially?
Tony, I think that's one for you, isn't it?
So in the report, there is a section, and you just have to bear with me, but I will find it for you, Councillor Curtin, is the impact on councils of change, which is in the management case. And that talks about the stranded costs. That also talks about the purpose of councils. So if you take Three Waters out, which is a third of their revenue and their work, what is left for for those councils in terms of their strategies? That is certainly one of the big decisions that as we move around these councils that are being discussed by the mayors and the chief executives. So without Three Waters, what's the council focus in terms of well-beings? I can separately provide you the information of the detail of that.
So it's anticipated there'd be more work in that area to examine the consequences of...
For the purposes of this report, to this point in time, if there was a decision, be it through a mandated government reform or something that we did regionally to meet those reform objectives, then there's certainly some quite specific pieces of work that will need to be done, including a regional asset valuation and assessment from an independent party for consistency.
All right. The other arm of my question, Mr. Chair, is around the structure itself and the consequences for our local democracy when we move from ratepayers with direct representation onto their councils. We move to a joint committee, then a board of directors. So we've got very substantial alienation of the democratic process in that. Has that been explored, and is it explicit for decision makers and ratepayers what they can expect in the structure?
The structure that has been proposed would require legislative and government intervention to deliver, regardless. That may look quite different under a government reform program in terms of how that might be organised.
So we now have this significant shift of about a third of the asset base and a substantial amount of the work of councils moving into an unelected entity, and I'm interested to know the consequences for our democracy as we know it as a result of that. Is that going to be explored further?
Well, look, it would need to, and it would come down to things like the shareholder agreement around the entity itself, and the way in which the contract for service by the new entity is derived. So one option is that remains relatively bespoke to each of the 4 districts. And so one of the things that Napier has impressed upon through this process is the ability for a council to elect to have a higher level of service, the example being chlorine-free drinking water supply that might be more expensive. And so Napier, for example, could decide that it's willing to pay a higher user charge per household to achieve that higher level of service. And so that could be therefore brokered between the entity and the individual council. So it's certainly assumed that some flexibility around the service that a community wants and therefore gets delivered can be accommodated within this model. I think the emphasis on the governance, though, is on defining the outcomes and the performance of the assets that is desired, and then leaving it to a commercial board to deliver that. And ultimately, if it's not delivered to satisfaction, there would be penalty arrangements and ultimately the hiring and firing of the board to achieve what it is that the joint committee and each individual council requires. So I think that the democratic will can be provided for. At the moment, we don't have council laws deciding, what size pipe to put here or there. At the moment, I think in all 4 councils, involved, the councillors themselves make relatively high-level decisions about the allocation of funding. The performance of the assets is actually defined increasingly through regulation and resource consents. So that's something that we typically define, and the new drinking water regulator will be defining in very specific terms, and the assets will just have to deliver those standards as defined, and there's not a lot of discretion in there for individual communities to pick and choose how they want the assets to perform. And I think that's it's an important part of the context. We're moving to Three Waters being heavily regulated and defined by asset performance in a way that for the last 50 years, and as we found out in Havelock North, has not been there. So it's going to get much more prescriptive, and therefore the role of councils in deciding, how your assets are going to perform is going to diminish, and it just goes to what's the most cost-effective way of meeting those standards.
Craig, and then back to Rick.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think that just peeling back, the key question is, has the status quo worked? Has it delivered fresh and safe drinking water for everyone across Hawke's Bay and accessible to, where practicable, everyone across Hawke's Bay, and sustainable management of wastewater? So if that's the starting question, and the fact that all councils have signed up to the MOU says, actually, by and large, maybe we haven't been able to get to where we would have liked to have been. Doesn't really matter why, they just haven't. And so, actually, I think that's very, very positive. I think it's also important to note here that we have the ability to influence the model under which this happens.
Craig, have you got a question? Or?
Yeah, well, I do actually. I was going to come down to the Rex,
Thank you.
But it led from someone's very first question, actually. Someone asked Councillor Barker, actually, about the buy-in from the various councils to it, so therefore they have. First of all, is it possible for this to happen, the current model is generally prescribed without all of the councils participating? Is that considered? Has it been thought about and rejected? And then I've got some further questions actually about your recommendations.
This question was asked in Hastings as part of our workshops, and the response from Dan, based on the modelling from Morrison Lowe, was that, to make this work for our region, the key Hastings and Napier have to be party to this. Mm-hmm.
So okay, so it was considered and not form part of the recommendations. Well, then just cutting straight to the recommendations then. So there's some questions around here, because it asks us, particularly recommendation 3, we are asked to agree that agrees that Hawke's Bay Three Waters business case of Three Waters service, so Councillor Curtin's actually been asking questions about the business case, provides our region's representatives, so I presume that means us plus our colleagues on all the other councils, in the reform program, detailed information and analysis to engage with government to identify approaches to service delivery, etc., etc. Well, I don't feel comfortable saying yes or no to something where a councillor in Wairau may or may not have a full understanding of what's in that business case. They may well do, but I wouldn't expect them to answer for me, nor me them. So it's a very broad brush we've been asked to agree to there. Maybe that came out of the change in tack that the CEO mentioned earlier. Is that, there's many, because it says recommendation 3.
Recommendation 3. So it might have been easier if it said that agrees that the report provides this council with
I was just saying
detailed
that.
information and analysis.
Well, because we can't agree to other councils, and it's your interpretation of detail. That's because that's at a high level, fair enough. Actually, perhaps soften it. At the end of the day, though, as you said earlier, this gives us the ability, am I correct, to help influence the model. And we chose 2 years ago this council to be part of this, which I think was very wise, and potentially to be the honest broker at the end of the day, however this plays out.
Craig, are you proposing that we amend that to specifically point to us?
Well, I can't agree that other councils, I don't know what they've done, seen, met or
So
discussed.
yeah.
So yes, I think 3 needs to be reworded, only so far as this council is concerned. we can note that other councils are looking at it or something. And the detailed information, if I ask Councillor Curtin, does he feel he's got enough detailed information to agree to that rec? I'm not sure what his answer would be, but I think it's on the negative. So I think we just reword that, because this is a noting and receiving paper, as was noted earlier. If Leanne could reword it.
Well, supplementary to that, I presume this report came to us because the other councils had signed off on it as well.
So the sign-off is happening simultaneously, and hence also the reason for an extraordinary meeting.
Okay, just to answer this, that's fine. So I therefore I agree with the subtle nuance there. I've got two questions. Following up with Councillor Curtin, would it be fair to say that democracy has been seen to fail in the water supply situation vis-a-vis Havelock North poisoning of thousands of people, and decades of effluent pouring into Ahuriri estuary? So people have found that this is not working that well. Secondly, would it be fair to say that if you have an entity as is outlined here with directors, that the protections councils and councillors have from legal action against them is stripped away, making the directors much more liable and vulnerable to it?
There was the first one. Did you want to answer the first one? That was both questions.
Both questions?
So look, on the...
Is it fair to say?
Oh, both questions?
Yeah.
They started with a question word.
On the first question, look, I think it's reasonably self-evident. We've got more than 70 local authorities in New Zealand that range from Auckland City down to Wairoa District, or even smaller councils in New Zealand. And what that's resulted in is highly variable performance of Three Waters assets around New Zealand. And now, following the Havelock North water incident, that we're moving to standardised performance in regulation across Three Waters assets nationally. It's bringing to the fore the substandard performance of those assets, and in turn the challenge of those small councils to fund the upgrades that are required. So that's what has led the 5 chief executives of the councils in this region to conclude that the status quo is not tenable, and that some form of reform or change will be necessary unless central government is going to provide vast amounts of subsidies to every council in New Zealand, particularly the smaller ones, to lift their asset standard up. And that, I mean, that genuinely is an option, but it hasn't been pursued here, because the signal we've had from central government is that if they are going to provide funding, they want to see an efficiency and effectiveness dividend for their funding by way of smarter delivery of these assets. And that takes us to the capability and capacity that even if we plug more money into the system, having every small council in New Zealand trying to build the same engineering and management capability replicated throughout is not an efficient use of the nation's resources, and will certainly be challenging to procure those skills in any event. So we look at all that and we say, well, there has to be a smarter way of delivering. Central government's willing to provide some funding, as it did recently with the 50 million that was allocated to Hawke's Bay, but it does want to see us looking creatively at different ways of delivery. So, yeah, I think your question implied that the status quo has not been satisfactory. Certainly our experience with Havelock North. You'll recall that we ended up in the Environment Court over wastewater in Central Hawke's Bay. The challenge now for Central Hawke's Bay is funding the solution that they now need to provide, and that's pushing them right to their debt limits. And we're in a process around Wairoa's wastewater at the moment, which is suggesting that they don't have the balance sheet strength to deliver the sort of modern wastewater system we'd expect them to have. So, yeah, so change is absolutely required with respect to the liability of the directors. The new legislation that's just been passed around drinking water does create a stronger set of offences on the operators. That typically lands on the chief executives of the councils and of the drinking water supplier. So it would be certainly the chief executive of the new entity that would have the prime accountability around things like drinking water. But the directors, I would expect, would have some degree of liability as well. And I think councils are more or less protected today as they will be in the future. So typically it all falls on, certainly in this council, in the current circumstance, it falls on me, as opposed to on councillors where we have a public liability question in relation to the performance of any of our assets.
Are there any other questions, Craig? Does that satisfy you? It won't probably satisfy Neil because the detailed
From
information.
this council's representatives of the detailed necessary to engage in. Was necessary there before?
No, it wasn't.
So just drop necessary, my suggestion, and because there's more things that are necessary to engage. So basically, I know it was kind of harmless prior. It's slightly even more harmless now with my concerns earlier. So yes, that picks up my concern. Obviously, we've got to pass it around the room. But can I just ask a question, as Councillor Barker asked about the other councils are doing it relatively at the same time. Are their recommendations in their version of this paper the same?
So I've just come from Central Hawke's Bay and Hastings, Nut Regional to Napier this afternoon in Wairoa, and the recommendations are consistent, except for Napier.
So the agreed process
was going to be now.
The agreed process was that we would have a standard paper that everybody would use, so we continue to move forward together. And Napier elected late last week to rewrite their paper. I actually haven't seen their recs.
Okay. Well,
Their recommendation will be to receive the report as information purposes only.
Yeah, so that's even safer, isn't it? Because I'm just not wanting to throw a spanner into the regional works here. But I ask you that question because I'm very much in favour of the government's ambitions here. So my suggestions to change in 3, just your guidance as to this won't throw us off another rail, so that's cool, then I'm comfortable with that.
No, it won't.
And obviously other
No, that's
colleagues
good.
got to have a look.
Henny White.
Kia ora, Tony. So mine's a bit of a flip of a coin. So on one side is a region. What will be our priority and major challenges moving forward into the reform program? And then the other side is, can you perceive any pitfalls from central government side on how the program will move forward?
Good anyway. From my perspective, there's not a lot of information yet in terms of how government is going to engage. What we have collectively, through the mayors and chair, have sent a letter to the steering group asking them, because of the work that we've done and the way that we've been collaborating, particularly with Māori and iwi, is that is channelled through us. There's, as we discussed at our workshops, a big lots of opportunity for confusion with the different programs, the work that we've been doing. So managing that through Hawke's Bay is going to be key to keep the same people engaged and utilise the mechanisms that we already have. I don't have a strong sense yet of what the program looks like in terms of that engagement. I'm hoping to get that over the next few weeks. We have a meeting, as I said, with DIA next week, and there's a series of hui and webinars that have been created. So that is a risk that the communication engagement strategy probably isn't as well managed as we would like it to be regionally.
Did it answer both your questions?
As best as they can
Sorry.
be answered, I think.
Sorry, that was the first one. Do you want to just repeat the second one?
Oh, the pitfalls with central governments. The relationship with central government on the program moving forward.
What I can say is the engagement that we have had as part of the Hawke's Bay Review for the last 2 years has been positive and in partnership with the support of the Minister and the Department of Internal Affairs officials. which resulted in us getting 1.5 million for this project, and then a further $20 million uplift. So, we've got the opportunity to continue that leverage and that investment by being a step ahead as a region. So until we engage fully and understand the work that they have done, where the design thinking is at, and the opportunity for us to provide input into that, and particularly the challenges we've discovered through this process, I can't say, but we will keep you advised.
Chair, Tony just mentioned the numbers. I think it's important to reinforce, because it might not be as clear as it could have been in the paper, that this body of work has been 75% funded, I think, in totality from start to finish by central government. So they have largely funded this exercise for us to enable this community to have a conversation about the issues it's confronting and the options for navigating that. And I think the bald reality of the situation is that central government has made it clear following the Havelock North water incident that the status quo of Three Waters provision in New Zealand can't continue, and they intend undertaking reform. And the opportunity for Hawke's Bay off the back of this work is to shape up and define its future provision. And if we don't take that opportunity, then there is every probability that central government will come to its own conclusions about how Three Waters will be delivered for this region, and we won't be necessarily in charge of our own destiny in that regard. So that's the opportunity we're confronted with, and we can say that it's all too hard and we'll stick with the status quo and wait for central government to do something to us, or we can rise to the challenge and come up with a solution. Whether this is the right one or not, that's the conversation that now has to take place with the community.
Well summarised.
Just one further quick question.
Yeah, one question.
As was mentioned earlier, if assets are moved over to the new entity, obviously liabilities and forward liabilities and commitments to deliver upon these higher standards also come across. So the burden of that moves from those councils to whatever that entity is. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
That was a good little ending to your statement there. Great. Good little. Okay. So we've had all the questions. Do we have someone to move the recommendations with the changes that Craig has made?
Happy to move.
Mover. Craig will second it. You wish to speak?
Just to make an observation, this, in retrospect, I'm surprised it's taken this long to get here, actually. If we go back and think of how good has democracy been at managing our water supplies, I think the scorecard, if you're going to look at it honestly, would say not good at all. In my own town, Hastings was mayor for a long time, who was an ex-plumber, who lauded the fact that they had the cheapest rates. He made sure they did no pipes or plumbing in Hastings for a long time. Well, this came back to haunt us. So the point is that it's politics and the relationship between the local people and the councillor who determine the quality and the standard of the water supply. It's really interesting that we had here, and just take one example in Napier, a lot of effort put into building a velodrome. $9 million. Yet at the same time, when there was a lot of water and the normal large shower came down, the water system in Napier couldn't cope, and the overflow effluent went into the Ahuriri estuary. See, it was more acceptable to have effluent in the Ahuriri estuary for those who were in charge of the organisation and prepared to accept that and preferred to go for a velodrome. In part it's because politicians want to have monuments to their own greatness. Let's be clear about this. And they want to be able to go and say, look, I built this velodrome. Look at this, grandson, I made this. But they aren't going to be that keen to go and say, beneath the ground here, there's a 4-foot wide pipe. When I came in, it was 2 foot wide. And by the way, see that pump station over there? I built that pump station. There's no sex appeal or glamour in that. And so very often these projects have been put aside in favour of monuments to people's greatness. In my view, politics has failed in the delivery of water. And in the case of Havelock North, there is no question that this council challenged the Hastings district on its earlier plans, but we were told and argued by Hastings that the cost of the ratepayer was too high to go and redo the bores in Havelock North. Politics prevailed, not the rules of law. So what's being changed here is going to be a rules-based system, removed from politics in a way which is better for the provision of water and the provision for the provision of the sewage systems. And we're going to be asked to do it either collectively or individually. And the point that the Chief Executive made very well, there ain't enough resources, ain't enough talent, ain't enough ability, ain't enough engineers for every council to do it to this standard by themselves. We're going to need to do this collectively. And so the question then comes to, do we do it as a region, or we do it as the bottom of the bottom of the North Island? And this region's got a choice to make. We either see ourselves as a region, say we are going to do it with a black and white jumper, or we're going to try and do something else. For those who want to say, let's not do it, they're going to make the decision to be shoved rather than jump. There is no doubt the political will to go and do this. So this is a matter of whether we do it or we have it dealt to us. For those who want to be shoved, well, good luck to them. I don't agree with that. I've always been someone who, if it's got to be done, it has to be done, go and do it. I have a very strong preference to doing this as a region because I am very proud of Hawke's Bay. Yes, I live in Hastings. Yes, I'm proud of Hastings, but I live at Hawke's Bay, and I want to see a Hawke's Bay solution to this. This is inevitable, and I would say again, politics has failed, and that's why we are where we are.
Thank you, Rick. Craig, it's a hard one to follow, that one.
So I guess the Rick Barker statue's off the cards, and it's the Rick Barker Memorial Pipework Network or something.
No, don't be stubborn.
I hear what you're saying, Rick. Yeah, that's look, I'm very positive about the ambitions here from all levels, and Councillor Barker made a very good point early on there, in that it's either going to be this is going to happen either individually by council or across some regional model. But I think, just to try and be solution-based, particularly this organisation, who actually has very little stake directly in what's proposed, although if it went to Four Waters, obviously we would. But understanding, Napier obviously has concerns, and they're elected officials, people just like ourselves, as well as their staff. And so understanding those and trying to find potentially a way through. Because I think the question hanging at the end of the day is, let's just say the perceptions of financial inequities weren't there. Let's just say it was agreed that where every council's network was. Then the question would be asked of every council, would you still be in, meaning the asset of your Three Waters network and forward liabilities would be removed to this other resource. I think that's a very important question to keep posing so we don't get too stuck on the burden on ratepayers or not, because at the end of the day, one of the reasons we went to go early in this from those other workshops was to influence the model with central government. And once it's identified what that gap is, an independent validation and valuation, well, there are some metrics, financial metrics to present to government to go, well, here you go, if you want us across the line, this is what we as Hawke's Bay require. Even if that was solved, I'm only 50-50, in fact, if all the councils were to buy in to what that would mean next, because it would mean differences for the council's operations, obviously. But anyway, Mr Chair, happy to continue with my second of the motions of those recommendations, and look forward to presumably the other councils working positively and progressively to a solution to something that actually has failed over many years.
Thank you, Craig. Neil, and then Martin.
Well, thank you, Mr Chair, and it's been intriguing to listen to my colleagues cheerleading for government ambition and cheerleading for Beltway bureaucratic views on how we all should run the region. The question posed as being, do councils work, has politics failed, as my colleague Councillor Barker has said? Well, sure it did. Havelock North is a clear failure of politics, failure of duty at a local government level. Its only precedent prior to that was the failure at Cave Creek, and I can often compare the two. So what we've got is failure of governance So have we dismantled the Department of Conservation? No. We've tried to remedy that. And if you ask the questions, do councils work? No, they don't. They clearly don't work. So let's do away with councils, because it's far more efficient, much more suitable for the Wellington bureaucracy, much more at home for Labor government politicians to have limited and no local government. That's the way you roll when you're in that environment. I don't buy it from one moment. Ratepayers, Napier ratepayers in particular, should be afraid, and very afraid, because make no errand about this, Napier ratepayers are paying. And I've heard a few words to the contrary, somehow that we're going to escape what in fact is in store for us. And I'm just reading at page 130 of the Morris Lowe report that says the immediate reduction in Three Waters charges for Central Hawke's Bay and Wairau is $1,116 or 49%, $699 respectively. For Hastings, it's a modest $30 decline. But under this option, Napier ratepayers see an increase in rates compared to the status quo of $230 or 25%. So what we've got here is a rather stealthy move to burden one part of the region that over in another. Now, the argument posed by the chief executive was that somehow that would be remedied because of the unstated costs and capital requirements of Napier City. But let's not quibble about this. When those costs and assets are properly counted and that liability is realised, there will be an extra burden on Napier City alone, because the reality is, the paper in itself says this, is that there's an affordability element. Wairau cannot afford to pay the additional liability over and above what's stated in the paper, the additional liability that is going to occur for Napier. I'll turn now, Mr. Chair, to the stealth which is going on and the somehow easy acceptance of the bureaucratic model that is imposed on us by this approach, by the recommendation. So what we've got is the establishment of a joint committee. We've got the transfer, the alienation of nearly $2 billion worth of ratepayer-owned assets into an unelected, faceless, distant bureaucracy, which we are told is somehow responsive to the aspirations of ratepayers. We know that is simple nonsense. It just doesn't happen that way. If we expect, for example, Napier City ratepayers who may have expressed their view about chlorination and desire to have non-chlorinated water, and we've got the directors of this distant, dark and dim group of directors to somehow put themselves at risk by saying, Napier, just go ahead and not have chlorinated water, well, that's simply not going to happen. The arm's length relationship is a destruction of the democratic processes we've come and have understood for a long time. I'd be much more inclined to a model that does truly represent a regional approach. We can't argue with that. We do need one. It's not affordable as it's looking now. But the model proposed alienates the ratepayers from their elected and the elected opportunity for elected officials to actually influence what's going on in that community. So they are my major concerns, is that what we're doing here is giving away a very substantive, the most substantive piece of local democracy that we've seen since 1989. And that's something that I believe will haunt particularly Napier ratepayers for a long time to come in supporting this move.
Neil, Martin, I haven't timed anybody's speeches. We've had 2.5 quite long speeches, but so I'm not going to time you either, Martin, but can you just be aware?
All right. I will try not to overstay my welcome. I
Never.
I think the previous speakers, bar one, are correct that this is going to happen and it has to happen. The wastewater treatment standards this council needs to have in place and enforced are simply unsustainable under any other model and inequitable in terms of any metric of affordability. So the motion is to receive the report, and I fully support that. It enables us, as the motion presents, to engage with central government and in a way whereby we can get ahead of the reform, we can understand on a straw man proposition what this actually means for us, where the wrinkles are, where the issues are, and I guess better equipped to deal with some of the concerns that Councillor Curtin has expressed. I do think there's an element of scaremongering in that. I'm looking at a page which suggests that Napier's ratepayers would be paying a total of $140 per year in 2032 under the asset owning option versus enhanced status quo. To me, that's a very small marginal price to pay for the regional benefits that we are looking at here. Councillor or Mayor Wise is right to say that she will be a stuck record on chlorine and the ability of Napier to make local decisions and seek an exemption from mandatory disinfection through chlorine where possible. Good on her. I support that and I campaigned on it, so that's fantastic. But with the benefit of this report, we are better placed, as I say, to get ahead of that reform and engage on how we retain local voice to the maximum extent consistent with the inevitable and essential reform we're engaging with here. So I support the motion for that reason.
Thank you, Martin. Now, on Zoom, does anybody on our Zoom wishes to comment? Is that a no?
Mike's got his hand
Oh,
up.
Mike, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I pretty much agree with all that's been said this morning. I think for me, if we don't get this regional approach, then the greatest burden falls back on Waiau and Central Hawke's Bay. And quite frankly, unless the government, and regardless of what hat they're wearing, whether it's red, blue or green, would have to stump up with enormous amounts of money to support those two districts to bring their services up to scratch. I do take Martin's point in regards to, at the end of the day, it's about the regional environmental outcomes that should actually be driving this, because at the end of the day, having raw sewage poured into the Tukitook is just no longer a acceptable outcome. Having raw sewage poured into the Waiau River and out into the bay is just no longer a acceptable outcome. It is incumbent on the whole of the region to actually work together to rectify the situation. Certainly support the inclusion of the cultural impact considerations. I'm pleased to see that they're still there. I had the opportunity to speak to Central Hawke's Bay Councillor this morning. The adoption of the cultural case by them yesterday was pleasing. So yes, for me, I certainly support the recommendations. Kia ora.
Thank you, Mike. Michelle?
Kia ora. Yeah, the wastewater, I mean, I spent 3 years, well, nearly 4 years talking about wastewater. There isn't anything I don't know about wastewater, in particular the Waiau situation. And I also visited Waipukurau and got to see the mess that's in as well. And then you look at the difference between the waterways and what they're taking on. But my kōrero to everybody is you know, like if you're sinless, if you haven't done anything wrong to the water and you're not polluting the water, then put your hand up, because you know everybody's deteriorating the mauri. and it needs to stop. And this is the only solution. The sort of rates that they were considering to get our vital standards, especially our wastewater, up to what it should be, is you know, we can't pay them. You're talking about people that can barely afford to put a kai on the table, worrying about the next bread and milk tomorrow, and you want to put their rates up to 4,000. People will lose their houses. They will dive into deeper poverty, and it's 64% Māori in my community. So speaking to that, this is the only solution. This is the only solution to improve our environment, and that's what we're here for, to improve our environment, to restore the Māori. And that's my kōrero on that. And it's about, from a perspective of tangata whenua, we'd suffer if we had to pay that sort of money. So this is the only way, this is the way that we've got to move forward. And I support what they're proposing. And kia ora.
Kia ora, Michelle. Api or Will?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will take a quick moment just to acknowledge the comments that have already been shared during the meeting around those risks. Councillor Barker's comments with regards to decades and decades of our water being managed by local territorial authorities, and the clear evidence of political motivators in some of the decisions that have been passed historically have led us to sit in a ring with central government and all our other local territorial authorities and basically battle out how we might be able to walk forward into the future given the condition of our shared assets. So from a tangata whenua perspective, my first primary comment would be around the Māori engagement strategy, which will come alongside the ongoing work in this space. If Māori found it difficult to work with local territorial authorities to try and find a shared understanding on the value of water, I imagine that is only going to become more complex once there are two more barriers between those of us on the ground and those of us who will hold the decisions. I'd probably also take the opportunity to reinforce that I'll be watching very closely around how we collectively will be supporting the Three Waters Group, and from an iwi's perspective particularly, how policy and resourcing will be outlined with regards to Pierre's role currently in that group and how he may be able to build a comprehensive strategy that keeps iwi involved, engaged and up to date on the progressing talks. Water has had a very difficult history, and so from an iwi perspective, our interests are ensuring that we work and create spaces, even in this uncertain time, where water is put first. Te Mana o Te Wai guides the decisions, whether it's with a commercial directorship in a CCO or whether it continues to be in some sort of hybrid form with our elected members. We remain motivated to ensure that Te Mana o Te Wai and Te Mauri o Te Wai are foremost in the development of conversations and policies going forward. There are significant risks and huge costs associated with this progressing work for Māori. I'm particularly cognizant of those who are living in rural sectors. When it comes down to a small network of 2 or more houses, the costs are going to be hugely burdensome on those small community groups in our rural sectors. So Warrell also has the opportunity, as does Central Hawke's Bay, to develop some really innovative solutions around this conversation and how we can continue to achieve our water needs without placing undue necessary burden upon particular stakeholder groups. Outside of that, I just would like to, if I may, Mr. Chair, just to add my comments as an elected member of Napier City. And that is from my understanding of conversations at Napier City. Just like all our local territorial authorities, we are very cognizant of the growing concerns and risks. As Councillor Curtin mentioned, the separation between our ratepayers and the decision makers is also a risk. Napier's been on a significant journey for some time, addressing some of the risks around its water. And I would say that the newspaper's illustration of potential concerns from Napier, while partially valid, my understanding of the conversation of Napier City Council is they are a part of this team of 5 councils and iwi, and we are looking to secure the best option for Hawke's Bay going forward, but we also want to make sure that the specific interests and concerns of our catchment are reflected adequately in any ongoing conversations. So outside of that, thank you very much for this report. It's a step in a process. We've still got a long way to go, and iwi still remain ready to engage effectively and at the forefront with our local territorial authorities on what this new model might look like for us here in Hawke's Bay. Kia ora.
Thank you, Api. Will, I notice you've come on screen.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just try and be quick, but yeah, I think it's all pretty much been said, but I think we all agree something has to be done, and probably just back up Michelle around the affordability of our smaller communities and districts, and for a region-wide approach, you know, this is the best way forward for those in particular. So yeah, I'll definitely support this.
Thank you, Will. Is there any other comment around the table? We've done our dash. Thank you, everybody. I'll just want to make one little comment. I clearly support this for all the reasons which have been given around the table. But I just want to pick up on Api's point. There are some dangers and pitfalls as we go through something as big as this, and we need to be really careful about that. We need to be careful about our maraes and our small farming families, where it might be a retired dad and a son living on another house and a shepherd living in another, and we don't want them to be regarded as a water authority and having huge costs. So we just need to watch this as it goes through and just capture the small pitfalls that could affect our communities, especially our small farming families and our maraes, which will be on their own water. So, because there's another thing here too that's really important, and Rick raised it really early on, and that is if we drive this, we have a chance of keeping it within our ruhi. Because one of the other pitfalls, which I would regard as quite a major pitfall, is that the government divide this up into 4 components, and all of our water and our assets are all driven out of Wellington or Palmerston North. That would concern me a bit. So if we go down this track, we do have a chance to keep it within the boundaries of our existing ruhi and the boundaries of our existing iwi, which I think is really important. So just on those closing comments, I'll put the motion, and the motion, of course, is just to receive, and it has Craig's change, that it refers directly to our council. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Against? Are you against, Neil?
We're just receiving it.
You were just receiving it.
Happy to receive it.
Okay. Thank you. Then that's unanimous to receive the report. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Tony.
Seek leave, Mr. Chairman. Seek leave, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, Mike's gone. Okay. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Tony's roadshow continues.
We have item 5, leveraging council's 1 million recovery.
Yeah, this is reasonably self-explanatory, I hope, so shouldn't require too much introduction. But Ian, is there anything you wanted to discuss before?
Just a
questions?
couple of quick comments. Chair, it is pretty straightforward, and take the paper as read. Perhaps just a reminder of the fund tending to create those leverage opportunities, and this is a good opportunity for us to leverage off an application of the Freshwater Improvement Fund. Just to note that irrespective of the outcome of today's decision, we will progress with a Freshwater Improvement Fund bid, so we will still look to leverage our existing project spend from that fund, and that there is a residual amount that is left if you agree to these 2 projects that are tagged for asset management and for Whangawahi. And we're bringing this to you now because the reality is we need to have these decisions lined up, not only with the Freshwater Improvement Fund round, but also for us to spend the money this financial year. We need to understand whether that funding's available today. And of course, last point, the Freshwater Improvement Fund bid is contestable. It's no guarantee we'll get that money. If we're unsuccessful with either bids, we will bring back to you further advice on how we could utilise that funding. So happy to take questions.
Right, questions for Ian. Martin?
Thank you. Look, I'm really supportive of the direction this leveraged funding is being proposed for. Just wanted to understand, though, as a reference to 40 jobs or 40 work for 40 people through planters, fences, etc. My understanding is that these are projects that we are doing anyway, but the leveraged funding would enable us to accelerate them. So are those 40 jobs that would mean we can get on the ground faster, or is that an additional 40 jobs above what would have happened anyway but slower? Just talk me through the incremental benefit that we achieve through the leverage funding.
So the benefit comes from the package Untitled, which is the $6 million spend, and obviously that scales back depending on the size of the project. If we don't get the Freshwater Improvement Fund, it's less. If we don't get this funding, it's less. Freshwater Improvement Fund, it's less again. Either way, we will continue with the projects using our existing budget spend. It's just the impact in terms of employment and outcomes would be less. So the 40 is the total as per the paper and would be scaled back depending on the level of funding we got.
Does that answer your question?
No.
$6 million,
Yeah.
40 jobs.
Got that.
If there's less jobs.
Yeah. It seemed to me that it was reading that these projects were going to happen anyway, because I noticed later on it says that if this project could leverage 400 from the council's recovery fund, it would allow total project delivery time frame to be reduced from 5 years to 3 years. So I just sort of had a sense that this was happening anyway, so it's not more, it's faster.
Well, there's a combination of more,
Yeah.
and there is a combination of faster. So the more comes, particularly in the Hariri project, which is a large engine, particularly with the funding from the recovery fund, is a large engineering structure to deal with soil erosion. So, there's no.
It's both more and faster. Okay.
Yeah, and there's no easy maths to kind of translate the money to employment. It's not a binary one-to-one relationship.
And so really the double you get, I mean, we could double the existing funding that we've got for those projects of, say, 800,000 to 1.6, but if you add the 400 and you double that as well, it's double the part of the $1 million fund that we're essentially buying. Okay.
Rick, then Henry.
I could just observe before I ask my question that I like the style of your report, I like the reasons of the report, the recommendations, executive summary, because you really got into it, but I was a bit bewildered by the numbers. Yes, you've got scores, but you didn't give me the how you scored these. So it was no code cracker. Numbers are only important if they have order and structure. Right. They've got a unit of measure and a point of contact. So 1 is sometimes a good thing, but sometimes 1 is a bad thing. 5 can be, you don't want to be 5th in the race, but sometimes you do want to be 5.
Good. Very good observation, Councillor. 5 is the highest score.
5 is best.
You didn't tell us that.
No.
I appreciate that. So my apologies. That's
good on literacy, a fail on numeracy. Thank you. All right.
Was that the question?
Yeah. Okay. So what does it mean? So 5 is high, but you should give us a code cracker for it.
Yes.
We can't analyse it.
That's a good point.
Kia ora, Ian. This is what I'd call my parawa me te pata, so my bread and butter, so I loved reading this. I have a couple of questions about your table, and when it says landowner contribution and in brackets existing arrangements, does that mean we already have some sort of MOU with those landowners, or What does that mean?
So you're referring to the table on page 13, top of page
Yes.
13?
Yeah.
Yes, so as, I think the paper gives you a bit of a steer. We're active in these catchments already with these communities, and we do have a number of projects on the go. This gives us the opportunity to leverage more, both in an engineering sense and an ecosystem prioritisation sense, and for it to go faster. So we do have existing relationships and arrangements with landowners that we are leveraging off in this bid and with the bid to the Freshwater Improvement Fund.
Okay.
The primary driver of that would be pace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So given that the 1 million that we set aside in the annual plan will expire on the 30th of June, Crown money is all about getting money out the door and jobs on the ground as fast as possible. Effort here has been to leverage our existing activity and commitments to the greatest extent possible, not only to leverage money, but also to get the action underway quickly.
Just supplementary, I really like the layout of the paper as well.
To the writers.
And
Two compliments all at once.
sorry.
That's great.
And I just compared the two catchments, and I see that the Ahuriri or the Wharerangi catchment seems to be more advanced in the program, so it's ready to hit the ground running. There'll be direct and immediate environmental outcomes, whereas the Porongahau catchment scenario looks like it's more of an educational piece.
Well, so the spend that this money would go to in Porongahau is to already identified sites in our ecosystem prioritisation work, so building fences effectively to protect those habitats. And the 400,000 speeds up the delivery of that engineering structure in the Wharerangi stream. So they're both advanced in terms of where we need to go and what we need to do, particularly targeted this funding, acknowledging that in the Porongahau catchment, an element of the overall package is the support for the collective, or the collective catchment community actions and initiatives. So it's supporting that. That will be longer term and ongoing into the future.
Would you say that the catchment proposal would have less employment numbers?
I would,
proposal?
in the short term, yes, but in the long term, it will generate a lot more because we're trying to create that action on ground at property scale, and that will naturally result in more planters and fences, et cetera, as landowners get engaged, agree to make change on their properties, and we come in and support that.
Jeff, do you? Yeah, I have. Yeah, once again, very good report. Nice and clearly written. Just one of the catchphrases in here to capture is 40 jobs. When I wrote for, and the question will be coming, Mr. Chair, when I wrote for funding to go into Pacific, the catchphrase was always poverty alleviation. So when it comes to employing, so I've got two questions. Who is going to be the employer? And secondly, how will this be visible in, say, a year or 2 years' time? And then I've got a subsequent question after that.
So we will be the employer for physical works that we're engaging and we're running. So probably in both situations for the spend from this fund, we will be the employer. How will it be visible, if you mean physically visible? Or
No, actually, as in 2 years' time, when our request from
how do we
you,
report it?
how do you report it?
Sure. So
How successful have we been with those 14 places?
yes,
FTEs?
look, extensive reporting I didn't bring with me, but if we get the Freshwater Improvement Fund bid across the line as well, there's quite detailed, in-depth reporting that MFE requires for the Freshwater Improvement Fund. It's actually nicely lined up with the way we report in our organisational performance reporting anyway. So you'll get that feedback in terms of what was spent, what was done, what's been achieved through both our performance reporting. If we're successful in the fifth, you'll get the reports that we're sending to MFE on top of that.
I think you're going to be assured that Crown ministers have a laser-like focus on the visibility of jobs and numbers of jobs. So the reporting requirements, as Ian said, are very strong and very clear on that.
subsequent question, unless Neil is more urgent.
No.
Okay.
very patient
So,
man.
in my experience over the last 17 years in the labour space, is to get the best outcome for these 4T, and my question is going to be whether you've actually allowed for this in your bid, is I don't think we want experienced fencers pulled out of other regions to go and do the fencing or the planting. Are we actually investing in these people by giving them training so they actually create skill so that once this funding is finished, they don't actually have a career to follow on with?
So, in the broad Jobs for Nature program, both nationally and regionally, we've been quite closely connected to the Ministry of Social Development and other employment-related agencies. The long and short of it is that we are obviously not the recruiter and trainer of fencers. We rely on those companies who are experienced and competent in that to do that for us. What we're doing is working to bring in the companies who are engaged in bringing on the recently unemployed into training programs to work with us on these programs. So it's that marriage of the contracting community with the right people and the right approach, joining the projects that we create. So our funding and the projects, along with the contracting community, create those employment opportunities. That's the model, because we're not set up to be the recruiters or the trainers. We rely on the contracting community to develop the workforce and to do that in partnership with the likes of Ministry of Social Development and others. In fact, James may be able to add more, but in the overall Jobs for Nature program, there's a strong focus on that, and there's a lot of work and a lot of thinking going into how to support the right people in that unemployment mix across. And I don't think it's necessarily the long-term unemployed. It's probably more the recently unemployed who are looking to retrain and move into new vocations.
Thank you, Neil. And then Craig.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Ian. Can I just, sorry to dive into the weeds a little, but there's a reason for that. I just want to take you to your paragraph 27 in your report, in your paper, and you've helpfully identified some of your inputs there for those Prongaho projects, or that looks like 2 sites you're looking to protect there, and then above it in 25 you've got a schedule of the things you're looking to do with that funding and the additional funding. And can I take you now back to perhaps paragraph 21 in regard to, funnily enough, Ahuriri, and where we haven't quite got as much specificity identified in your paper, and it's okay, and in addition you've got a schedule of inputs that are not the same as the other project. My observation of this is perhaps it's a workshop or some other scenario, or even an on-the-ground field day to have a look at some of this stuff. Can you say what outcome that you're looking to achieve? For example, you've got 45 hectares in Prongaho. What do you expect there to be in terms of conserving the sediment going into the waterways? I mean, I'm assuming they're in high red zones that are discharging a lot of sediment. Do you expect there to be a X percentage reduction in the known sediment? Is it worthwhile putting your outcome expectations in your reporting framework?
Yeah, and look, good question, Councillor, and the Ahuriri detail is lighter than the Prongaho, just because effectively the funding from this fund for the Ahuriri project is focused on a large engineering structure in the Wharewangi stream. There's I forget the technical term for it, but it's effectively a large eroding face, very steep face that is just moving back. Very weak and vulnerable soils. There's been attempts historically to remediate that unsuccessfully, and in fact not in a way that would meet modern practice. So it was done some decades ago. we want to hard engineer a solution to that to stop it. I can't give you the numbers, but we could provide that in terms of what that would stop.
Yes.
And then, so there's three parts to it. That's one part of it that this fund would allow us to focus on and speed up. Then there's the ongoing activity we've got through the ECS with our space poles and our riparian work and the team broadly across the catchment. That would carry on anyway. And again,
So-
I haven't got the numbers, but I could give you that.
That's fine. I mean, the point I'm wanting to make there in particular, so for the bangs for bucks we've got from protecting that through hard engineering, how much...
What do we get?
What do we get for a dollar? The other supplementary, Mr Chair, is you've identified the Whalarangi subcatchment specifically here. Is there room in this expanded or accelerated proposal for work? I would suggest something like the lower Taipo stream, for example. Is there room to accelerate other projects in the catchment, particularly around riparian planting?
The answer is always a possibly yes. Look, it's hard to give you a categorical yes or no because I don't know the site you're referring to. Look, we're open to any opportunities and any offers in terms of sites for more work. There are existing sites that the team are already working on using those relationships we talked about before, that this speeds up for us. What it does mean then is that they fall off the priority list and funding's freed up for new sites to come on board. So it really depends on the site, its context, and how it's prioritised relative to erosion risk.
Sure, thank you. Great report.
Craig?
Thanks. Gee, that table again on page 19 or 13? 13. With the landowner contributions. So currently budgeted, we're spending real and in time, in kind, about 1.7, 1.8 mil. And then existing ratepayer contribution agreed is 560, so about 40%. So have you considered that those landowners contribute pro rata that 40% of what we've been asked to allocate of the 700k?
Sorry, do you mean asking the landowners to match fund?
So the increased payment, if we're lucky, we'll get some increased payment from central government. But you're asking us here to commit to 700k of spend, right? And there'll be some private benefactors of that because of enhanced properties, planting, fences and things like that. So did you consider going back to those actual landowners and saying, actually, thanks very much, we're going to enhance, speed up and quicken this project to the tune of 700k from other ratepayers, and we're looking to you to contribute the same pro rata, about 40% of that. Was that considered?
No, so it wasn't. And look, I don't have the detail of what sits behind those landowner existing agreements, but purely and simply that we have an erosion control policy. So a lot of the leverage funding from landowners is coming from their contribution to activity on their farm. That's currently a 75-25 split. Landowners 25, us 75. So at 40%, that's high. I hadn't done the maths to make the reconciliation between our existing commitment and theirs. That's actually higher than our policy allows currently. And it could be that the leverage that exists there already takes account of the 700,000 that we're looking to add in from this. So I don't think there's scope for us to squeeze more out of landowners because we've got a policy that sets up what our financial grant subsidy rates are.
Okay, well, if you don't, can you just come back at some stage with that, because it's ratepayers are putting $1 there, not $1 somewhere else.
Sure.
And so if this is successful, at the end of the day, the summation would be ratepayers from across Hawke's Bay are investing funding in, say, Ahuriri and Napier and Rongohau and Central Hawke's Bay. So is that how that's working?
But it's, look, I mean, if you were very granular, that's certainly in this particular situation, but the fact remains that our work and our funding and our grants spend is broadly across the region. So these same sorts of activities occurring in Wairoa, in Heritonga, they're across the whole region. And it's done on a, where's the risk, where's a willing landowner who wants to work with us, we'll go there and deal with the risk.
Yeah,
whatever
no,
we need.
just the point being the regionality of it, because another one of these will pop up somewhere else.
Sure.
Are any of those landowners local territorial authorities or central government owned assets, such as Landcorp?
I couldn't tell off the top of my head. I don't believe so. I think they're all
Okay.
private farms.
Thanks, Mr Chair.
Okay, I think we've...
Chairman, I'd like to move that we receive the
Thank
report
you.
And I'd
Thank
like
you,
to
Martin.
second.
and adopt the recommendations in paragraph
My
1 to
mother
3.
would say, I'll dance at your wedding in my bare feet. Thank you for that.
Well, that'll save me buying beer for everyone. For being
He's
a
going to
minute
bear. He's going to bear his
And
soul
a
at your
seconder,
wedding.
we have a seconder. Do you wish to speak, Martin?
late. No.
Do you wish to speak anyway? Thank you very much. Does anyone else wish to speak on this matter?
Can I just ask something, please?
You wish to
Rick?
speak, Michelle?
Yes, on that freshwater improvement fund. It's just that, looks like an afterthought for Wairoa there with the 50k on Whangawehi, and I'm just thinking, is there an option? You know how we have the river reserve fund? I don't know how much it is for our Wairoa River, but it seems to keep being ignored, and this is a 5-year fund. And it's a big issue. I could name multiple areas that need some help immediately, most especially the spawning streams. But one of the other eligibility criteria in the Freshwater Improvement Fund is that they increase the application of Mātauranga Māori and freshwater management. Is there, because I know it closes on the 21st, I'm engaging at the moment in collaborating with a couple of organisations back here to put in an application, but it seems like there might be a better opportunity had we worked together for this, especially when you're looking at Te Manawa Wai, the measurement of the Māori. Just my comment that, I totally get the other areas that are being addressed, and most especially the Ahuriri estuary, because in my position I speak on behalf of them as well, but I'm just a little bit disappointed with the 50k for Whangawehi and still nothing for the other parts of our district.
Chair, can I suggest that we look at the remaining 300,000 and what might be able to be achieved in Wairoa, but we will need to be mindful of a couple of things. One is that Council has already approved a chunk of the Wairoa River Reserve to be used to leverage the Crown money that we got out of the flood schemes for the Ferry Road stream bank enhancement, and I heard late last week that the budget on that's looking challenging, and we may have some cost overruns that we're going to have to pick up there. It is over $1 million worth of expenditure there. So that's a significant project in Wairoa that's part of the job creation from COVID recovery, and we've been able to leverage our existing money as well as a significant amount of Crown money on that. I think as Council will be aware that we do have a range of programs running, such as at Whakaki Lake, etc., in the Wairoa catchment at the moment. And we might be quite close to capacity in terms of undertaking more projects, but perhaps if we have a look at it with the remaining 300,000 in mind and come back.
And just Chair, the other thing, certainly we are active in the Wairoa catchment, investing in projects and programs up there. The other thing just to bear in mind is that we need to be shovel ready. So we've got a limited runway here to get these things cemented, agreed to, and then funded. We've learnt, experience has taught us that it's difficult to do these things on the fly because you then run into landowner politics down the track. We need to see a nice package that everybody's agreed to for us to confidently move into that space.
Thank you, Ian. Michelle, we note your disappointment. All those in favour of the motion?
Frustration.
Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, may I add a comment?
No.
I realise that we raced into the vote there. Okay. Kia ora.
Done.
I didn't see your hand up, Api. I apologise.
He was actually waving
Oh,
and
is it?
saying he had a question.
Oh, well, I'm afraid we missed that one, Api. I'm really sorry. Apologise for that, mate.
We want to go home, Api.
When will this agenda item come back before council, please?
It has. This is an extraordinary council meeting.
That's done.
Yeah. and it hasn't gone via committee simply because of the deadline for central government for submission of our application for funding.
Closes on the 21st, Uppy. Not much time.
So,
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
So that is the end of our meeting. Thank you very much. It went on a bit longer than I thought it would. I think I will take up James's suggestion of timing speakers. Would you close our meeting for us, Petty?
Before you do, Perry, can I just briefly, very sincerely thank all my fellow councillors for their kind messages of support. And aroha over the last week, it has been very gratefully received, and for your mihi to me earlier, Perry, that was much appreciated. Thank you indeed. Cards and flowers included. Anyway, thank you.
Practice makes perfect. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi ake ana te atakura, e teo he huka, he hauhu, tihei mauri ora. Cease the winds from the west, cease the winds from the south. Let the breeze blow over the land, let the breeze blow over the ocean. Let the red-tipped dawn come with a sharpened ear, a touch of frost, a promise of a glorious day. Kia ora.
Thank you, Petty. Thank you, everyone, for attending on the Zoom. Thank you for everyone else.
Oh, I was gonna